90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College. Welcome to another edition of From the Press Box. My name is Rob Leonard. Joining me, of course, is award-winning author and my brother, Tim Leonard. Hello, Timothy. How you doing?
When did I become an author?
Well, you're a sports writer, right?
Yeah. Let's go with sports writer, brother.
Well, maybe I'm projecting. How's that? Maybe you'll write a book soon.
Projecting is never a good. Projecting is never a good idea.
I'm projecting with my brother. It's not like Trump, where every time he projects onto someone else, he's really talking about himself. No,
well,
I'm talking about.
See,
I'm talking about my brother.
Maybe you're going to write a book, brother.
Maybe I'm going to write a book. I have 3 ideas. You know that.
Of course.
Today is Memorial Day weekend, and this marks the 6th anniversary of our show premiering back in 2014. And we're always happy to do this show. We have a blast doing it. We've only missed it a couple of times. One time I was in the hospital, and the other time was we had to figure out what was going on with our now remote situation, which most of the station has been doing. And we thank Sean Novat, our director, and just for keeping this on the air, because it's a lot of work. It's not just you walk into the station and everything is there and you just hit the next button. There's a lot of lining up on this. It's tougher than it looks. And we thank Sean for keeping us on the air. Anyway, we will be talking to Pat Calabria of Newsday. He covered the Islanders back during their dynasty years. And today, there's 24th, we should say, May 24th.
Yes,
marks the
40th anniversary, brother.
40th anniversary of the Islanders winning their first Stanley Cup championship. They won 19 series in a row, the best ever for any team. No one's ever done that. They won 4 Stanley Cups in a row. To me, they're the greatest dynasty ever in hockey. I don't care about the Montreal Canadiens. I don't care about the Winnipeg Jets. The New York Islanders, 19...
You mean the Edmonton Oilers?
I'm sorry,
brother.
Edmonton Oilers, yes.
Winnipeg Jets.
I don't know. I'm thinking Bobby Hull. Anyway, I had Bobby Hull hockey, remember?
Yes. Think about Wayne Gretzky.
Well, yeah, Wayne Gretzky. But they won 5 out of 7, so they didn't win them all in a row. So I think the Islanders were a better-built team than the Oilers. And we'll talk to Pat about the whole thing with the Islanders. And they've been showing the games on MSG Plus of the last series of where the Isles beat the Flyers in 4 out of 6. And it's great stuff seeing this. And last week, I just want to bring this up, brother.
Yeah.
SNY showed all 7 games of the Mets 1986 World Series. And I have to say, just watching, they didn't do much editing on them. They kept it mostly in real time. And I have to say, it was fantastic. I mean, just listening to Vince Scully and Joe Garagiola, and you see little things that people forget. First of all, what was Stapleton's first name? The guy back up for the Red Sox. You remember his name?
Jeff Stapleton, I think it was.
No, Jeff Stapleton's the guy who dated our friend Suzanne St. Pierre.
I don't know what it is.
Anyway, what his first name? Whatever. He came in the first game to take over defensively for Bill Buckner.
Okay, good for him.
Well, you think about Game 6, and Buckner is out there. And we know why he was out there, because they were about to win the World Championship, and John McNamara wanted him to be on the field, which is an understandable thing.
Dave Stapleton, brother. How about
Dave Stapleton? Thank you. So anyway, Game 6. First of all, the guy coming in with the parachute is fantastic. Pure New York. Second of all, Buckner was actually having a good series. His hitting was really good. And
Buckner always had a good bat. He had what, 3,000 hits in his career? I mean,
it's close. And the interesting part about him is that he couldn't run. You can see him on the field. He's hobbling, but he is hitting. So
yeah, his legs were shot at that point. He had I'll correct myself quickly. He had 2,715 hits, not 3,000.
Right.
That's an enormous number of hits.
Sure, and he should.
And he was a career 289 hitter. So
and he's close enough to be in the
bat.
He's close enough to be in the Hall of Fame.
He's in the almost Hall of Fame, bro.
Yeah, if there is one thing, it'd be a place for him to be.
Definitely not the Hall of Fame.
Okay. Anyway, so I'm watching him because I'm watching him. Now you see all 7 games. You see little things, and he was playing really good. I forgot about that part. And you know what? One more thing, brother.
Yes, brother.
When Mookie Wilson comes up and he's just hitting things, foul ball after foul ball, and then there's a wild pitch. First of all, the wild pitch made it 5-5. So
that's correct.
So that hit he got, won the game. But if that wild pitch hadn't happened, it might be a little different. So
just a remarkable series of events, brother.
Yes, but I also, looking at the highlights again, I don't think Buckner could have got to first base before Mookie.
Mookie was fast, and
Mookie was
Buckner
fast.
Was not.
And I don't know if Bob Stanley would have got over there in time. So
it's very possible that Mookie Wilson would have been safe on that play, even if Buckner would have fielded the ball cleanly.
Because Buckner was far back on the field.
He wasn't quite to the right field grasp, but he was several steps behind the bag.
Right, and the thing is, before the wild pitch, he was covering whoever was on first. I forgot who was on first.
He was holding a runner.
Right, so if he was holding the runner, he would have been there.
That would have been Ray Knight, brother, because Ray Knight was the guy who scored.
That's right. Okay, Ray Knight. So he is literally on first base with Ray Knight.
Yes.
So he would have been on the bag most likely, and that ball wouldn't have taken that spin. And it's that wild pitch really that destroyed the Red Sox winning that game with Bob Stanley, not Buckner. I mean, it happened under Buckner's.
Well, it was both.
Thing, yeah, but
it
it's
was
a nice
both.
combination.
It was everything.
Yeah, it was a nice combination. So I have to say it's been fun watching these games, and the problem with the Mets is you start running out of great World Series because they haven't been in that many.
Yeah. But everybody wants to blame Buckner because that was the pivotal game losing play.
Right.
But, you look at what Bob Stanley did in that game, and to pull out an old Steinbrennerism, Bob Stanley spit the bit.
Yeah. So, it was pretty good. Otherwise, I was very. It's fun to actually watch the whole game. To say, hey, man, that's pretty cool.
Hey, man.
I just sit back and watch the whole game. It's a nice feeling, brother. They've been showing some bad Yankee losers with the Red Sox in 2004. It's been pretty cool with that.
I haven't been watching.
I'm sure you haven't, brother. I'm sure you haven't.
I'm not big on watching these old games.
You don't like the old games?
I watched some of the Islanders yesterday, and that was fun. But you
don't like watching the old games.
Sometimes if there's nothing else on, I'll check it out. But especially the ones I covered. I was there. I covered them.
What happens if you get a game with like Rizzuto and Messer?
Rizzuto, I'll watch it because of Rizzuto.
Yeah, so
something like that. Yeah, then it's fun. Then it becomes fun to watch because I miss the scooter.
Yeah. So, but it's still. I mean, for you and even for me, watching the Bucky Dent game is still,
That's awesome.
It's a great game.
Bill White, deep to left.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. I mean, I get a kick out of it. I'm glad, they saved as many of these games as they did because a lot of the games weren't saved.
Exactly.
And I was still waiting because they showed it only once. Someone is going to be showing the Mazeroski game soon. I don't know if it's MLB or if it's actually yes.
The Bill Mazeroski game, yeah.
Yeah, 1960 Game 7.
Good for Bill Mazeroski. I'm still not happy about what he did, but I'm happy for him.
Yeah.
He was a good man. His Hall of Fame speech, it still is one of the most touching things I've ever seen in all the time that I spent covering sports.
Right.
It was phenomenal. Just to refresh everybody, he couldn't speak. He couldn't get his speech out because he was so overcome with emotion. He could not speak, and he must have tried 5 or 6 times just to get the first paragraph of his speech out, and he couldn't do it. And he finally said, "You know what? Thank you. I'm done." Because he could not speak. He was that choked up and that honored that he just speaking was impossible for him because of the emotion of the moment.
Yeah, and think about Tim. You mentioned Buckner, the almost Hall of Fame. Mazeroski probably would have been that same thing, except there was a big push to get him into the Hall of Fame with the Veterans Committee.
Right.
So, so that's something to think about. Sometimes the Veterans Committee can, spin their magic, and
they know the players from back in the day, and there were some people that said Mazeroski didn't really belong in the Hall of Fame, but it was that one home run that kind of made a very good player into a Hall of Famer. And if that's the case, then hey, that's the case. But there usually aren't too many mistakes for the Hall of Fame.
Anyway, seasons are moving, brother. We keep hearing little things about what might be happening. Baseball is quietly trying to figure out what they're going to do next. We hear stuff like the NHL might have a 24-team playoff series. Might as well have them all. You're going to have 24. You might as well have them all at this point.
You have to also consider the time element of it, brother. When you say you might as well have them all, that adds another layer onto the playoffs.
Yeah, but
so that adds another week and a half, 2 weeks. So
yeah, but at this point, you're the 25th team, and you're like, well, we're better than those guys.
But it doesn't matter. You have to when you're doing this stuff, you have to work backwards. You have to say this is when we want to end the season, so that these guys can have a certain amount of time off in between seasons, and the NHL can reevaluate if there's a second wave or it gives the NHL some time to deal with whatever might come down the road next. So that's also part of the issue. So you don't want to just open it up and say, oh, we're going to have 3 months worth of playoffs, because they don't have 3 months.
Right. And then, of course, the NBA is like this talk that they might go to Disney World, literally.
Yeah,
Orlando. There's a setup there.
Orlando, the Disney complex is interesting because they do everything there. And I can't even imagine what kind of acreage they must have, because they have soccer tournaments there, like big soccer tournaments.
Sure.
And they have all kinds of hey, Pat Calabria. But they have all kinds of things that they have basketball courts all over the place. I know the high school girls softball teams, they have tournaments there all the time. So the like I said, the amount of acreage they have, the amount of courts that they have,
right?
They just it's almost like it's its own city.
Okay, brother.
It's just like Sports City.
We'll continue this. You're listening to From the Press Box right here on 90.3 WHPC. Joining us as our first guest in our remote world we're living in right now is longtime Newsday writer. We'll find out the exact time again. Pat Calabria, who covered the Islanders during their dynasty. And, of course, May 24th marks the first of 4 Stanley Cup wins. Pat, welcome to our show again. Thank you for joining us.
I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Can you get just a little closer to the microphone? Just pull up, a little bit like that, yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's a little bit, because what happens is the echo goes in the room first and then hits the mic. So, because we're not taping this. When there's no video, we're just recording the audio off the video. So just to let you know.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Okay, that's good. That's great. Anyway, Pat, thank you for joining us. Talk about the Islanders. First of all, no book, right? You didn't write a book since the last time we talked to you, did you?
No, I haven't written a book, but I have a lot of memories.
Oh, that's good, because I would. Last time we had you on, the first thing I said to Timmy afterwards, I said, I'd love to read his book. You had some great stories about the Islanders. Now, when did you start covering the Islanders for Newsday? When did you quit? Well, when did it end, I should say?
I started covering the Islanders in the 75-76 season. That was the season right after they made it to the semifinals and one game within the finals when they lost to the Flyers in Game 7.
Right.
And I continued, of course, through the 4 Stanley Cups. And after they lost to Edmonton in the finals in '84, that's when I decided I wanted to do other things. And, of course, I did fill in from time to time. I was at the Easter Epic game in '87.
Wow.
Yeah.
The one that didn't end.
The one that never ended, right.
That was the game where Pat LaFontaine did the interview after the game, And then the next day he said, or like maybe after the interview, he said, "Oh, just make sure. Did I say anything stupid?" Because he didn't even realize what he was saying. He was so exhausted.
Yeah. What I remember about that is after filing my story, I got back to the hotel at about 4:00 and slept till 5:00.
Wow.
A whole hour. And then because it was Easter Sunday, I grabbed the 7:00 old Eastern shuttle from Washington back to LaGuardia.
Oh, wow. Wow. It was a great game. So let's talk about the Islanders' first win, their first Stanley Cup win, of course. I was just telling Timmy, I think the Islanders are the greatest dynasty ever because they won 19 straight series.
Hockey dynasty.
Yeah, okay. But that's a good way of putting it. Even better than the Canadiens. I'm sorry, Canadiens. They only won 10 straight series. Even better than the Edmonton Oilers. I'm curious to what you would think. I know you covered them, but you also have a bigger view of the hockey.
I think you can make a very good argument for the best dynasty. I mean, it's sort of splitting hairs, particularly with Montreal, but they did win the 19 straight series, and they had a team that could win in multiple ways. They had a great offense. They had a great defense.
Yep.
They had great goaltending. They had great special teams. So they could win in a number of ways. And I think that's really what made them a great team. To do 4 straight 19 series at a time when those series were grueling. No disrespect to the Canadians, who certainly had great teams, but there were times when they were winning 2 series to win a final.
Right. And they won 4. They won 4 Stanley Cups right before the Islanders took over. So if I remember.
Yeah. And if you look at how the Islanders played against the best competition, their record in final series, I think, is 12-3. Or they lost in their 4-year run. They lost 2 to the Flyers in the final.
Right.
1 to Minnesota, 0 to Vancouver, and 0 to Edmonton. So that's
right.
So that's
right. They swept Edmonton that last one.
Yeah. So that's right. 12-3 record in the finals.
It's incredible if you think about that. It's just this is and it was truly a great team. Now you were covering the Islanders, and I did a lot of research looking back, and sometimes you forget little things. And I forgot that Butch Goring came to the Islanders late in the season. I used to always think it was earlier in the season. It was literally with like 15 games left.
Trade deadline.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting because we're so late in the season, and you gave up 2 guys who had been there forever, Dave Lewis and Billy Harris. But I can't see the Islanders winning without Butch Goring.
Oh, so. I agree with you. They went 8-0-4 after that trade. They finished the season 8-0-4 after they got Butch Goring.
Wow.
They needed a second center. There was no question about that. That's what had hurt them in the previous series when they were favored. And that trade, I've said it, did 2 things. Usually a trade does one of 2 things. It either shocks the team and tries to get them to do something,
right?
Or it's a message to the team that we're doing this because we have faith that you can win. We believe we just need this one more part, and we can help you win. That trade did both. I mean, it shocked them, and it also expressed confidence in them.
Yeah, like I said, it was 2 guys who'd been there forever, and I'm sure they're all friends. I'm sure they gave him a playoff share after the season ended. But it was I didn't realize it came so late in the season. So you're right, it did shock them, and you got to remember. And this is the other thing I didn't realize: the Islanders didn't win the Patrick Division, I guess it was called then. They didn't win that division. They came in second place that year. Flyers came first.
That was the year that the Flyers had their incredible 35-game unbeaten streak. Mm-hmm. And also the Islanders were not a very good team for a long time. I believe, they had the hangover after losing to the Rangers the year before.
Right.
They were pretty much a 500 team in January, and then took off. And the thing that people forget is there were three individuals with varying degrees of ability who really made a difference in that 80 team. One, of course, was Goring.
Right.
The other one was Ken Morrow, who came right from the Olympic team. And it was Ken Morrow who enabled Bill Torrey to trade Dave Lewis in that Goring trade.
Right.
Okay? Without Ken Morrow, I'm not sure they make the trade because, they made it because Ken Morrow clearly was able to fit in right away. And the other person who gets overlooked quite a bit because he was a down and dirty, in the trenches kind of player is Gord Lane, who had a reputation for not being shy in moving people out from in front of the crease, and he would do it, and he would use a stick if he had to, and players were not opposing players were not as comfortable in the crease when Gord Lane was there.
Good point.
Right. You need to have a physical presence in front of the net, and he certainly gave them that. Pat, I just want to kind of a simple question to start with. Just talk about what it was like covering those teams. I know that winning makes it easier to cover any team, but what for you stands out about that group and about that run to the first Cup?
That team was a joy to cover, and visiting writers would be amazed at how great they were to cover. They were good guys, character guys, funny, quotable. There was no mistrust of the media. They enjoyed having the media around most of the time. I still have friends to this day. I'm in touch with guys like Bob Bourne and Lorne Henning, and I see Clark Gillies around every once in a while, and Bobby Nystrom, I see him around at an event or so every once in a while. But they were really fun guys to be around, and that really came from Bill Torrey and Al Arbor, who set a tone of you have to have respect for the media, and they did. But it was, like I said, it was really. It was a different time. There was less media, but many times I would be finishing my interview and somebody would call out to me and tell me what bar they were going to in case I wanted to join them after the game. Nice. And it was quite common.
Very cool. Very cool. One thing about the 1979-80 season also to me is that the Islanders in the playoffs really were dominant. After, like you said, their season was a little up and down, but they beat the Kings 3-1. They beat the big bad Boston Bruins 4-1, Buffalo 4-2, and of course the Flyers 4-2. We obviously going to talk about the Flyers series, but what do you remember about those other series? The Kings, first of all, it's 3 out of 5 with the Kings. They don't do that anymore. But what do you remember about the Kings series and the Bruins series and the Buffalo Sabres series?
What I remember, people sometimes forget that King series was a tough series for a while. They won the first game easily. I think it was 6-0. They lost the second game, which was also at home. So they go to LA 1-1, and they're behind 3-1 after 2 periods in game 3.
Right.
And you could see that, is this happening? Is this going to happen to this team again? Being disappointing in the playoffs, but they rallied to tie the score, then win it in overtime when a shot by Ken Morrow hits Gary Howitt in the butt and bounces into the net. So they breathe a sigh of relief. They're ahead 2-1, and then they just really waxed LA in the final game. So again, that game 3 was a real turning point for them.
Right.
The Bruins, I specifically remember going to the Boston Garden on a team bus before game 1, and you could hear a pin drop on that bus. They had their game faces on. they were ready. They win the first game within 2 minutes of overtime, and they win the second game within 2 minutes of overtime. Go home, win the third game. Of course, there were all those fights between Terry O'Reilly and Clark Gillies and other Bruins. I mean, clearly the Bruins were going to try and run them out of the rink, and it just simply did not work. The Islanders were ready for that. They lost a fourth game late in overtime. That was Terry O'Reilly scored in Game 4, and so you thought they go up to Boston for Game 5. They're still ahead in the series 3-1. The Bruins scored 2 goals very early in the game, and you thought, oh, wow, is this series getting away from them now?
Right.
They wind up winning that game, I think 5-2 or 5-3, and it's over. And that series really, really made them that put a lot of confidence into that team.
Well, there were 3 overtimes in that series, which is incredible if you think about it. 3 out of the 5 games were overtime. Wow.
And they won every game they played in that series in Boston Garden.
That's even bigger.
Pat, did that series, do you think, kind of serve notice both to the Islanders and to the rest of the league? Did it kind of because like you said, the season before, disappointing finish. Here, it was almost like with the King series, here we go again. But to come back and beat the Bruins, and not only beat the Bruins, but beat them on the scoreboard, in the penalty box. I mean, they beat them every way you could beat a team. Did that kind of say to the team itself, there's no reason we can't win a Stanley Cup?
It did that. There's no question it did that. They stood up, where in the past they were accused of not standing up, and they stood up against a team that tried to bully them, and it just did not work. And you're right. It certainly serves notice. The rest of the league took notice of that series. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Okay. Just in terms of the actual dynasty, at what point did you see that was coming? Because I mean, you win one cup, and obviously that's a great feat. But did you after the first cup, did you at all any time write, hey, we could be right at the beginning of something very big here?
No, and I don't think anybody could have envisioned 4 straight cups. I mean,
no.
It hasn't been done since, and maybe won't be done again for a very long time. But I think after they won in 81, when they beat the Rangers in the semifinals in a sweep, and then lost 1 game to Minnesota in the finals. So that's 1 game in the last 2 series they played. Then I think people started to think, and I know I did, who's going to beat this team? Who's going to beat this team? Edmonton was an up-and-coming team, and people knew that, and they had Gretzky, of course, but really,
but they were still very young at that point.
Yes, and so I think it was after 2 years you began to think, geez, this could go on for a while.
I thought that after the second year, I was like, the Islanders are never losing again in the Stanley Cup. They just were playing. I thought, and I'm a fan too, but you just get that feeling that this is going to continue because they basically kept the core team. We talk about the Islanders. I mean, the Yankees in the core 4. Well, the Islanders had their core 7, I guess, core 8 maybe, who were there every year and were very important to this team. And you just couldn't see them losing with this core group they had.
The interesting thing is, in the 83 final against Edmonton, they were portrayed as underdogs. Edmonton now had really hit their stride. They had Gretzky, they had Messier, they had Paul Coffey, Gary Curry. And the Islanders, who were 3-time defending champions at that point, a lot of people were picking Edmonton, including, by the way, Edmonton. And the Islanders were really insulted by their being viewed as underdogs, and they were particularly insulted by the cockiness that those Oiler teams exhibited.
You're right. I remember a lot of people were saying, "Oh, the Islanders can't beat the Edmonton Oilers because they're the best new team out there." But the Islanders just, as you said, destroyed them basically. It was like we're gonna teach you guys how to do this.
I remember before the first game, Clark Gillies said, "Oh, they think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread." And of course, the Islanders dominated that series. While Edmonton had a couple of flashes, I believe, pretty close on this, Edmonton held the lead for that series for 4 games total for about 5 minutes.
Wow.
The Islanders were either tied or led the rest of the time.
That really is domination right there.
Yeah.
Pat, it's, as far as the 1980 Cup and after Bobby Nystrom scores that obviously what is now the probably the most famous goal in Islanders history.
It is, Tim. It is.
Tell me what the locker room was like after that game. Kind of take us inside the insanity. I mean, I've been in the Yankees clubhouse after they won a World Series, and the Mets clubhouse after they won the National League pennant. So I know what it's like, but I want you to take me inside that Islanders room. I also want to know, do you regret your clothing choice for that game, or did you plan ahead?
Yeah. Well, I did sort of plan ahead.
All right.
But it was absolutely insane in that locker room. Everybody was in there. There were fans in there. There were wives in there. There were parents of players in there, friends. I mean, there seemed to be a real lack of security in keeping that room free of interlopers because there were so many people. And, of course,
yep.
They were drinking from the cup, sipping from the cup. Some guys had boyhood friends in their locker room. I remember Wayne Merrick going to a telephone and calling a boyhood friend who, they had played hockey together and they were best friends still. And I remember John Tonelli talking about being a boy in his living room in Toronto, skating around with an ashtray over his head, pretending it was the Stanley Cup.
That's great.
There were guys like Lorne Henning who were teary-eyed. Lorne Henning probably poetically began the winning play, passing to John Tonelli, who passed to Bobby Nystrom. So you had 2 original Islanders on opposite ends of the play, beginning it and ending it. So that was kind of poetic. And it was, they were relieved and delirious at the same time.
Yeah, no doubt.
Also, talking about relieved, the last 2 years, there was talk that, this is the Islanders' year. And it didn't happen, obviously. They lost to Toronto, and then they lost to the Rangers in 79. So they were supposed to win those years, if I remember right. And of course, they didn't.
Right.
But that's what I remember carrying into 80, that this was sort of the last time they were going to do this. Or maybe they trade everyone.
Yeah, right. And they were supposed to maybe win in 78. They were supposed to win in 79.
Right.
And they weren't supposed to win in 80 because they finished with the 5th or 6th best record in the league.
Right. Right.
They won the Stanley Cup with the lowest finish up to that time of any Stanley Cup winner.
Wow. And they did differently in the playoffs. So they took the 16 teams and put them in order, and then for the next round they took the 8 teams and put them in order. So it was 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7.
And that's how you wound up with the Islanders and the Flyers, the 2 teams from the same division in the finals.
Yeah.
Let me just cut it for 1 second. I just want to make sure that people understood my question about clothing choice before. The reason that I asked that is because when you're in a championship locker room or clubhouse, champagne is getting sprayed everywhere, and champagne ruins clothes.
Yes.
So you don't wear the good clothes to the clinching game.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. We're talking with Pat Calabria. He covered the New York Islanders a long time, from 1975 1976 to 1984. Newsday beat writer for the Islanders, and we're talking about the first Stanley Cup that the Islanders won. 40th anniversary was Sunday, and we're talking about the Islanders dynasty at the same time. And it's funny because you have all these stories, and I'm still waiting for the books. Have you
why
ever
are you so
thought of
book obsessed, brother?
Because I listen to them. Listen to the stories we're hearing. Let's it's the Islanders. I would like, there's not many. The only person I remember writing books on the Islanders is two people: Stan Fischler.
He wrote books on everybody.
Right. Well, that's different. And then that Alan Hahn Fish Sticks book, which is like the only other book that's about the Islanders if you go looking for them. So, Pat, it's the
you convinced me. I'm going to have to work on one.
There you go.
Good. Okay.
There you go. You've accomplished your goal, brother.
I've done my job. Thank you. I will look forward to when you write the book and you coming back on the show again.
Well, let me just tell you one of the great memories of that night. So I file my story, and I go to a place in East Meadow called, at the time, Dr. Generosity's, which was a team hangout.
Yep.
Been there many times, drinking with players. And so I'm in Dr. Generosity's, and it's wild. You had to park blocks and blocks and blocks away from the place. And it's about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And Bobby Nystrom enters from the back door of the place to rousing cheers, right? And he had obviously gone home and changed because he's wearing a T-shirt that says, "I'm proud to be an Islander." And I thought that was just perfect.
That's
Absolutely.
a great story. People forget that in Game 6 that, he's, time is 7-11. That's burned into our brains as Islander fans. But he scored a goal earlier in the game. He had 2 goals that game. It's amazing. Just he got these weird goals at the right time. I guess is the best way to describe his goal scoring.
And there were so many guys who picked up their play. Lorne Henning, I watched the game recently. I watched it a couple of weeks ago. Lorne Henning had a great third period. In fact, he remains a friend. I actually texted him saying, "I'm watching the third period. You're having a great game."
Thanks, Pat. Took 39 years to notice.
Yeah. But Lorne Henning scored a shorthanded goal in that game.
Yep.
It was his third shorthanded goal of that playoffs. Now, 3 shorthanded goals in 20 games. Extrapolate that out. Do the math.
That's pretty remarkable.
That would be, over the course of 80 games, 12 shorthanded goals.
Yeah. No.
Teams don't get that many. Never mind one guy.
Yeah.
Well, he was good. He was good, guy to have on when the power play was coming against you.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was really good.
That was his specialty. That was his main role on the team was to be a penalty killer and to make sure that the other team's power play was neutralized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about that game. The last game, we'll maybe talk about a couple other of the Flyers Islanders series. Obviously, they win Game 6. First of all, it was interesting. It's a 1 o'clock game, if you remember, because I think was it moved? Why am I remembering that?
No, it was either
moved. Okay.
1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. I'm not sure.
I think it was 1 o'clock because I had to deliver my newspapers at that time, and I didn't do it because I watched the game. But people understood because, they're all Islander fans.
Yeah. No, it wasn't moved. I don't recall being moved. I recall.
Okay, then I'm thinking of another game. Okay.
Yeah. I recall CBS jumping on it. Remember that series was not televised nationally.
Right.
But all of a sudden, with the Islanders with a chance to clinch, CBS jumped on it.
Right. There was the CBS, and then CBC was covering it for Canada. Yeah. Channel 29 in Philadelphia, and then whatever the sports channel. Well, I guess it was Sports Channel by that point. Was covering it. So there technically were 4 games being broadcast that day, which is also unusual because you don't normally see that. Yeah. So you're right. CBS jumped on the Game 6, partly because it was in New York, I'm sure, but partly because it was dramatic. The Islanders, winning or the possibility of them winning, and everyone said, "Oh, it's going to be the Flyers." One thing I remember about the game, and I tell anti-Islander fans this: there was a puck, and I forgot. It went over the blue line the opposite way, and then the referees missed it. It got put back in, and the Islanders score. When you were watching that, was that something that the Philadelphia media was talking about a lot? Because I assume they jumped on it.
They were offside on a goal.
Right, that was it.
Yeah, the puck had been dropped back over the blue line. It wasn't called. It was clearly offside. Dwayne Sutter winds up scoring on that play. So yeah, and they're still talking about it in Philadelphia. But here's what I say about that. It was early in the game.
Right.
The Islanders have a 2-goal lead going into the third period. They sit on that 2-goal lead. Okay, they didn't generate much offense. They went into their defensive mode. If that goal doesn't count and they have a 1-goal lead, they're not sitting back.
Right. They're playing completely different in that period.
Right. They're playing completely different. And anyway, the game gets to overtime.
Right.
So you wash it away. Everybody has an equal chance to win. So, I don't see that as that offside goal. While certainly was offside and should have been called, I don't see that at all as being a turning point in the game.
I agree. We're talking with Pat Calabria. He covered the New York Islanders dynasty. He started actually in 75-76, went on to 84. And we're talking about the first Stanley Cup win for the Islanders, which happened 40 years ago. It's hard to believe, 40 years. It's just amazing. The time has moved so fast. But the Islanders, for that time was just an incredible team. Even up to like 87, they were, I think, a very good team. And I think after 87, they started to lose it a little bit as people started to retire or leave or whatever. So, but it's amazing that they did what they did. 19 straight series. What else do you remember about the Flyers game that maybe other people don't think about from Game 6 or any of the other games? Because obviously it's a 7-game series that won 6 games. So is there any other stories that you remember that maybe other people don't talk about as much?
Well, in the first game, they won in overtime on a power play goal, and it was the first overtime power play goal in many, many years. The idea that a penalty would be called in overtime, and that still happens, of course, it's very, very rare. And of course, people in Philadelphia, talk about that. But the fact of the matter is that penalty had to be called. I'm forgetting who pulled down John Tonelli, but the stick was around John Tonelli's neck. It was not
Jimmy Watson for holding.
Okay,
right on it.
Yeah. Way to go. So that penalty had to be called, and of course, I believe it was maybe it was Tonelli. Somebody passed the puck from behind the Island net to Denny Potvin on the power play. Tonelli didn't play on power plays. So
it was Tonelli and Nystrom on the assists on the goal.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so I was right in Tonelli, but it was unusual for them to be out there on a power play. It must, and Denny just walked into the pass and blasted it. So I remember that. Then the Islanders came out for Game 2, and for the first couple of minutes, they were just buzzing. And I thought, wow, could they possibly go up 2-0 on the Flyers? Flyers came back and won big 7-3, as I recall. And then the Islanders win Game 3 at home. And that's when I really began to think, wow, they have a chance to win Game 4 now and go up. Game 4 at home and go up 3-1 in this series. This is a very big game because either they're going to really take control of the series or they're going to go back 2-2 to Philadelphia. And they won Game 3 to go up to 1, and they won Game 4 to go up 3-1. And so at that point, you had to say, wow, they're in the driver's seat now.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, Tim, Tim, I thought you had a question.
Oh, no, I was just. Oh. Well, I mean, I'm kind of looking for Pat to tell us some more stories. So I'm just going to ask, what was your favorite moment of that Stanley Cup run, other than the winning goal? Because obviously the winning goal was the big play, and it also meant that the series was over and life would return to some normalcy after you finally filed your last story. But give me a moment that kind of stands out for you from that first Cup run.
Well, I remember they won the first 2 games in Buffalo, and they won the second game in overtime. And the way they won that game in overtime is that Bob Lorimer slapped a shot from the right point, and the goalie, whose name is escaping me, he made a pad save, but the puck rebounded out, and it rebounded out to Bobby Nystrom, who happened to be cruising right in front of the net. He scores. The Islanders now go up 2-0 and are heading home. And I remember pulling Al Arbor aside in the corridor of the old Ord in Buffalo, right? And I said to Al, "Wow, I think you guys are going to win this series." And he said, and Al and I were close and we had a good relationship. He said, "You be quiet." You know, he didn't want it jinxed, and so, that's, I believe the goalie was Don Edwards.
Okay, yeah, Don, I remember him.
Yeah, and so, I remember that. I remember after the Islanders lost Game 5 in Philadelphia, they're behind 3-2, and all of a sudden, and really kind of unfairly, people began to say, "Oh, geez, they choked again, or they're going to choke." And Gary Howard said, "The next person who says we choked, I'm going to choke him."
and I would have believed
Gary Howard, you knew he'd do it too.
Yeah. And then there was Billy Smith. So the Islanders are ahead 3-1. They go back to Philadelphia, and there's a practice, and after the practice, people gather around Billy Smith, and Billy, could be ornery, and he was not media friendly for most of his career. He was ornery, didn't talk much, barked at people. But during that series, he really began to loosen up, right? And even a little bit the series before. He's enjoying his newfound fame. He's enjoying winning. So somebody in the media gaggle asked Billy, before, you really didn't like talking to the media. Now you seem to be enjoying it. What's changed? And Billy says, "Well, before, all you guys were a bunch of jerks."
Well, the thing about
I was hoping that quote wasn't going to include a profanity.
Well, it actually did, and I
kind of figured.
Thank you. Way
to clean it up, Pat.
One thing, Pat, that we're talking with Pat Calabria, Newsday beat writer for the dynasty years for the Islanders. One thing about Billy Smith, during the playoffs, he would buy something and then he would have to win these games to pay for it, if I remember right. Like I think he bought a car one year or something, and if I remember right, he would use that as influence on himself to help himself win because he had to pay for the bill.
Yeah. That's why it was a money goalie.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, exactly. He needed the money. He needed the money to make a purchase or to pay for the purchase.
Yes. Pat,
here's my plastic. I'll see you after the playoffs.
Pat, what about the image for Long Island and the Islanders? And to me, I'm a believer that this dynasty that happened, which there's not a lot of other teams that could have done this. The ABA wasn't as well known as the NHL, obviously. Obviously, the Nets won a couple of years with Dr. J. But the image of Long Island, I mean, you'd go into the city. to cover the Rangers. And was there a snootiness toward the Islanders over the years that the Stanley Cup wins sort of took away a little bit?
Oh, I don't think any question. I mean, all of a sudden the Islanders became known, nationally. I remember there was a cartoon in a national magazine, and it said, when I said we were playing the Islanders, I thought you meant the New York Islanders, and it was a hockey team, and the other team was a bunch of natives, with arms with spears and things, right? So, they did a little TV. Certainly they gave the league a profile. The dynasty did. Dynasties tend to give leagues profiles, just like the Bulls did with the NBA.
Right.
And then the Yankees certainly with baseball.
That's true. Good point. It's funny that, like I said, I was talking about hopefully one day you'll write a book, because I'm trying to figure out any other. I mean, Nystrom didn't write a book. I don't think Trottier didn't write a book. If I'm remembering right. Mike Bossy didn't write a book.
I told you it wasn't back then. People didn't rush to write a book.
Yeah, but I figured someone would have wrote some, memories or something. I don't know.
Well, my thing is, I didn't want to, and probably that's why I haven't written a book. I didn't want to write the, Islanders Road to the Stanley Cup. I wanted to write a book that, had some meaning. I didn't want it to be a hockey book. I wanted if I ever wrote a book, I would to use a great example, I would want to write a book like Roger Kahn wrote about the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Okay. Boys of Summer or Summer of 49?
It was The Boys of Summer.
Okay. That's a good book. A very good book, actually.
Yeah. When I think of those Islander teams, I think not of just the players. I think of behind the scenes. Bill Torrey, what a genius he was, and what a culture he established where the players were never going to get Al Arbour fired for losing.
Right.
Bill Torrey would have moved players if they had lost it. And Al Arbour, I've always said this, Al isn't simply one of the greatest coaches I ever knew. He was one of the greatest human beings I've ever known, and I miss him. I do. Mm-hmm. I remember once it was a regular season game in Boston, and I had gotten sick after the game. I had a flu or virus or something, and the team was chartering home that morning. So I was on a team charter, and Al sees me just pale, just totally pale. And I had gone to the phone. He goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to call a cab home." And he says, "Don't call a cab. I'll drive you home."
Wow.
I've known a lot of coaches. I never have known a coach of his stature who would do something like that.
That's a very cool story.
Yeah.
And that's a very cool story.
That's when you're number one. You're dealing with quality people, but and I'll give you a pat on the back, Pat. That's they know they were dealing with a quality person too.
Well, I appreciate that, and Bill was great. Bill and I had a very good relationship. We didn't always agree. The thing about Bill and Al that I really liked is we could disagree. Writers like to be like general managers sometimes, right? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that?
Yes, we do.
And and we could have some spirited discussions, but it was always, fun and respectful. I remember, not too many people know this. After the Rangers fired Herb Brooks and the Islanders were looking for a coach, I called Bill and I said, "You should hire Herb Brooks." And he said, "Well, I'm not so sure. Why not?" He gave me some reasons. Obviously, he didn't hire Herb Brooks, but I do think about how I might have changed the course of Islander history in the late 80s and 90s.
We have 3 minutes left. Pat, anything you want to add before we say goodbye? Because it's an hour show and we're at 56 minutes.
Well, what I remember most about those teams is not what happened on the ice. It's what happened off the ice. They were character people. They were fun to be around. It's why I still have friends going back to 75, even before they won the Cup.
Right.
They were just quality people. They did not give women in the dressing room a hard time.
Which back then was surprising because, I mean, remember when the era that we're talking about here.
Yes.
Mid to late 70s, there were not a lot of women in the locker rooms.
Yes.
Right.
And I miss Al and I miss Bill, and I'm thankful that I keep in touch with a number of guys because they were just quality people and fun to be around. And 40 years later, I think, boy, was I young and were they young, and I didn't realize at the time, but it was going to be one of the greatest times of my life.
Were you there when Tonelli and Butch Zgorin's uniforms were retired earlier this season?
No, I was not.
Okay.
I could not be there, but again, quality people. Butch, funny guy.
Definitely. Yeah. We've been talking with Pat Calabria, a longtime Newsday beat writer for the Islanders especially during the dynasty years. Pat, I'm waiting for the book. Your stories are too good not to be in a book.
All right,
appreciate you coming on.
Get on it, Pat.
Tonight.
And we'll have you on again sooner than later. We appreciate you stopping by. Thank you very much.
Okay, have me on in another 40 years.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Pat. Great stuff.
Pat. Great stuff, Pat. Take care, man. Anyway, brother, we must go. It's time to leave. Anything you want to say before we got 1 minute? 1 minute?
Yes. Not really. I do want to say that I watched yesterday, and Tom Brady is a very bad golfer. That's my analysis of his game.
What do you expect?
But that's about all we have for live sports. So.
And of course, Joe
Flacco. Joe Flacco signed with the Jets as a backup quarterback to Sam Darnold. I got to be honest, bro. I like the move. I don't think Flacco is capable of being a starter anymore, but I think he's a good guy to have in the room with Sam Darnold. Yep. And they have the guy who they drafted in the 4th round, James Morgan. I think it's going to be one of the better quarterback rooms that the Jets have had in several years.
I think you're right, and I think he's had his time, which is usually the backups haven't had their time. This guy's had his time.
He has. He's had a successful career. He's thrown for just over 40,000 yards in his career.
That's a lot.
Good guy to have around.
Anyway, brother, another great show. Appreciated. Thanks for keeping us on the air, and we'll see you next Monday. Happy Memorial Day, everyone. And by the way, this is our 6th anniversary. We thank everyone for keeping us on the air.
Happy anniversary, brother.
Take care. Bye-bye.